Aragorn, son of Arathorn, is an absolute unit. Born from a line of magical kings and raised by the elves, Aragorn's a fearless warrior, a skilled healer, and a man of unwavering honour. He's the perfect person to be king of the realms of men. Maybe too perfect. When Peter Jackson and his co-writers Fran Walsh and Philippa Boyens adapted The Lord of the Rings, they made a lot of changes from Tolkien's books. And one of the most successful parts of that translation from book to screen was Aragorn himself, a character that, taken straight from the books, could have been a little boring and one-dimensional. But the adaptation improved Aragorn while capturing everything that made him great in the first place, while managing to keep those changes feeling true to the source material. Of course, Viggo Mortensen's flawless portrayal of Aragorn helped bring the character to life. But the changes from book Aragorn to film Aragorn work so well because they were all rooted in a simple and effective writing trick. So, what was that trick? And how can you use it to level up your own writing? Let's find out. To understand book Aragorn, it helps to know a little about the author. J.R.R. Tolkien was a professor of English at Oxford University, and the classic texts he studied there had a huge influence on his writing. Tolkien translated epic poems from Old English, like Beowulf and Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, which feature heroic warriors, noble kings, vile monsters, and magic. Book Aragorn is cut from the same cloth as these mythic figures, and his character resembles one of these romantic, chivalrous knights. He's innately good and incorruptible, possessing magic Numenorean blood from his royal lineage. He's a fierce warrior, having spent years roaming the land and lending his sword to those who most need it. But, most importantly of all, from the moment he laid eyes on her, he's been in love with a fair maiden, the elf Arwen. Unfortunately for book Aragorn, this fair maiden's dad says, "Tough luck, son, my daughter only marries kings." But, the dad says, "It just so happens that your destiny is to return your long-lost royal lineage and become a king." Well, either that or die trying. It's hard to be certain with destiny. So, book Aragorn's ultimate motivation is to return to the throne of Gondor so that he can marry Arwen and fulfill that destiny. A destiny that, much like King Arthur, is symbolised through a sword. Book Aragorn doesn't pull his sword from a stone though. His sword, Narsil, is the broken blade once owned by his great-great-great-great-great-grandpappy Isildur, and it represents his claim to the throne. In the books, Aragorn carries this broken blade around with him, and he has it reforged into a new sword, Anduril, when he sets off with Frodo on their quest to destroy the ring. By aiding Frodo on this quest, book Aragorn hopes to restore order to Middle-earth and prove that he's worthy of his claim to the throne. And book Aragorn is very confident in his ability to do so. Several times he declares himself as the rightful heir to Gondor, swinging his big sword at anyone who doubts his legitimacy. But this depiction doesn't really match up with the quiet, subdued, self-doubting version of Aragorn that we saw on screen. Film Aragorn is less of a magical kick-ass king looking to fulfill his destiny and become worthy of marrying Arwen. Instead, he's more of an everyman. Sure, he's brave and good at sword fighting and definitely still in love with an elf, but in the films, the more magical elements of his character are either downplayed or ignored completely. And his relationship with Arwen is transformed from this old school chivalry romance to a more modern will they won't they soap opera kind of romance. And film Aragorn's relationship with his destiny has changed as well. Instead of being this ultimate test he has to undertake to win his lady's hand, it becomes a burden. Film Aragorn doesn't carry the broken blade of Narsil around with him. In fact, he doesn't even want to become the King of Gondor at all, which Boromir seems pretty happy about.
Gondor needs no king.
Oh, and while Boromir's here, let him remind you that
One does not simply
ignore the subscribe button. Now, at a glance, it can seem a bit like film Aragorn was dumbed down. But the thing is, this more grounded version of him actually works incredibly well. Much better than book Aragorn would have fared on screen. So, what's the one writing trick that makes film Aragorn shine? Is it some dumb, reluctant hero bullshit? Did they take an old school Beowulf style hero from the books and turn him into this formulaic Hollywood archetype? Well, yes and no. You see, the writers understood that Book Aragorn is fantastic for the books. Tolkien's vision was grander in scope, including more characters, more locations, and more stuff. Middle-earth was a real place for Tolkien, and he spent decades working out the history, the geography, the cultures, and the characters, making his own version of these myths that he loved so much. As a result, Book Aragorn feels more fantastical. We already have the hobbits acting as our audience surrogates, so larger-than-life mythical characters like Aragorn provide contrast and make the world of Middle-earth feel more magical by comparison. Showing Book Aragorn as a reluctant hero with personal struggles would dull that effect. But for a film, the opposite is true. If Film Aragorn had turned up from the very beginning as this mega confident Giga Chad, he would quickly have ended up feeling one-dimensional. And with the story playing out on the screen instead of in your imagination, some of the more fantastical elements have to be more grounded in reality to avoid seeming too silly to be believable. So playing down Aragorn's magical prophesied king vibes makes him more relatable to a film-going audience. Which brings us back to that one trick the writers had to apply. Know your audience. Film audiences are used to certain story conventions, and film has different strengths from a novel. For Aragorn, this meant giving him an internal conflict that we didn't really see in the books. And since films are not as good at diving inside characters' heads, Aragorn's internal conflict is often externalized through the characters around him. So let's see how that works in each of the films, and how that arc he's given still ends up feeling faithful to the original books. In The Fellowship of the Ring, Film Aragorn's internal conflict is externalized through Isildur and Boromir, who represent all the honour and courage of men, while also displaying the very weakness that Aragorn is afraid of in himself. Isildur's corruption by the One Ring is overemphasised in the films, in order to serve as a cautionary tale about the kings of men making poor decisions. And Film Aragorn's worried that he'll end up just like Isildur. Boromir's role is tweaked from the books to amp up this conflict. In the films, he's pretty vocal about the fact that Gondor doesn't want Aragorn as their king, and Aragorn makes it clear that the feeling's mutual, saying he wouldn't take the ring anywhere near Boromir's city. Of course, as the story progresses and Film Aragorn proves he's a total baller, Boromir has a change of heart. So when Boromir dies defending the hobbits, he acts as a catalyst for Film Aragorn's change of heart. This scene changes from the books, with Film Aragorn promising that he'll protect Gondor. This change feels faithful to the book, because Film Aragorn is still nobly taking on the burden of becoming king, but this time, instead of it being to win Arwen's hand in marriage, it's to fulfill a promise he made to a dying friend. And, most importantly, he still doesn't know if he has the strength to do it, which will continue his arc into the next two films. In The Two Towers, Aragorn's journey to find his inner strength takes him to Rohan, and their king, Theoden. Theoden acts as Aragorn's foil this time around, since he's a once great king who lost his strength, which is the same strength Aragorn's looking for. In the film, Theoden's decision to go to Helm's Deep is played off as a cowardly move, which isn't how it's portrayed in the book at all. But these changes to Theoden allow Aragorn to play a different role that better complements his revised arc. At Helm's Deep, Film Aragorn finds the strength he was looking for, not in himself, but in the people that he commands. More emphasis is placed on tying Aragorn to the people of Rohan, like when he tells Legolas that if the people of Rohan are to die,
then I shall die as one of them.
This changes the tone of the ending to give him a more cinematic arc, where Film Aragorn convinces Theoden to ride out and meet the enemy in a final stand. In the book, Theoden is the one who wants to do this, and Aragorn just tags along. But Film Aragorn frames this last stand through the new strength that he's found, to ride out for Rohan.
For your people.
And then of course they ride out and Éomer shows up with Gandalf, showing that Rohan's strength has been restored, which of course demonstrates that Aragorn's become confident in his own strength as well. Now we get to the Return of the King, and this is where Film Aragorn starts to feel a lot more like Book Aragorn. He's confident in becoming king, and he finally gets his special sword, Anduril, to symbolise his readiness, which Book Aragorn of course had all along. In the film, this development feels earned, since the audience has watched Aragorn grow into this role. We aren't shown him being a confident future king straight away. Instead, we've seen him continually prove himself, despite all of that self-doubt. So Film Aragorn's arc feels like a more natural journey for an everyman hero, going from an unwilling leader and protector of the hobbits, to a leader of the Fellowship, to the people of Rohan, and then finally to all the peoples of Middle-earth, which is a more gradual and grounded take for a cinematic audience. And a brilliant thing is, this arc doesn't feel tacked on or contrived, because he still follows the same general path as the Aragorn from the books. But this new arc of being unsure of himself as a leader, and slowly overcoming that as he puts himself in the service of others, is very much in keeping with Tolkien's honourable character from the books. So, if you're struggling with how to frame a character's journey, think about what expectations your audience might have and the strengths and limitations of the medium you're working in, so you can meet those expectations in the best possible way. Until next time, keep writing.